Hi, and welcome to Let's Make a Game. We are in episode 13. We are making Off and On Again, a simple light toggling puzzle game. And I'm going to pick right up because episode 12 left off with a in progress task. We were working on updating the level select screen to match the new aesthetics of the gameplay screen, since they kind of borrow the look and feel from each other, and we refactored the gameplay grid so that the button press animations we could apply to both that screen and the level select. But we didn't have time to finish this up, and we're going to take a look at the current state of both the level select and gameplay screens, and take note of the things that we're going to be fixing up in this episode. So we're going to start off by adding a few things to our session 3 goals, just based on the current status there. So we had broken the symbol animation in the gameplay screen. We're going to fix that. And we also need to fix the level select button animation that we didn't finish hooking up properly. So took a look at that as well. So our buttons in the gameplay scene, we added a event trigger component, which allows us to hook up additional events beyond the on-click that the button by default provides. And if we take a look at our the gameplay button component, which is the grid cell controller, you can see that we've provided a few hookups to it that we're going to want to mirror inside the new button presser. I think these are some pieces that we did not move over yet, and we're going to do so now. We're going to add these. I'm going to move these to the shared button presser component that is used in both screens. But we're going to leave a partial implementation here, because it still has a behavior specific to gameplay. So we'll essentially have separate handlers for the button press and exit events that just work in the gameplay and in the level select and in the animation, so that each separate behavior is represented in a separate component. So add these to the button presser, and we're going to hook those up now to be in edit mode in order to maintain any of our changes, so we can't add these components in play mode. Okay, so we're going to add a pointer exit and a pointer down. We're going to add those. We'll hook up the button press and pointer exit to the appropriate methods. can see here right now, we're just working on this first button, and once we get it right, we'll apply those changes to the back into the prefab, and all the other buttons on the screen will update appropriately. Like so. And that button press animation will, I think, work right whenever we've got all of these together behaving the same way. And then so now we can see button press animation does just what we want. But we still have the bug in the gameplay scene that we're going to fix, which is related to the look here at our components, particularly button pressure. We'll see that when we change the symbol to point to a rect transform so that we can apply to either the image symbols in the gameplay or the text elements in the level select, we can have the same reference apply to both. We'll hook this up in here. And now we're going to go back to the level select so that we can load this in an appropriate level that we can actually see everything work in. It's interesting. It looks like now our animation's not running at all. Take a look at that. And that would, we had the existing event trigger in the gameplay scenes buttons, and those were hooked up to the gameplay grid cells handlers for the button press and pointer exit events. We moved some of that behavior over to the button presser component, and so we're going to have to apply that, essentially have those events bind to both handlers, like so. And now it looks like we've got everything working just as supposed to. A little oddity here. We can take a look at that quickly. I think that's just a lack of a reset in the start, so we're going to put that in place. Take a look at how that value changes on the initial events and see if our initial edited values for the offset to the text is a little wrong. So we'll just copy these values out of the play mode into the edited version here. Apply those back. Here I'm just making one last change. I hope one last change to the level select by adding a little background color that might get this to match better. That's a good point to save the work. See if there's any new files that came out of that to be added that are not. We'll update our notes that we have completed these leftover tasks. Right, and now we can move on to what was the original planned goals of session 13. We used a little bit of our time on these leftover pieces, so we'll see how far we get through, and hopefully we'll get everything finished up. But we'll also be doing some planning by the end of this session for the next two, which would be 14 and 15. Okay, so looking at our notes for the original goals for session 13 before the leftover pieces, our two main goals are consider and plan for transition and animations of toggle shapes, and working on row 3 of the levels out of the five rows of initial levels. So let's point out what this first task is about. Consider and plan for transitions, animations of toggle shapes. If we look at our game right now, we have a different number of shapes that are involved in the toggling interaction. That by default is a sort of cross shape. Then there are special pieces which allow toggling either of an entire row or entire column or a square shape. And right now everything just toggles like once, and especially for these where we're toggling many further out, it may be worth looking at some kind of timing added to the lights. So for example, when toggling this row here, if the lights toggled one at a time in a pretty quick succession to sort of draw the eye along the movements that are happening and make sure that the player understands where these are, and in addition to making the interactions a little more understandable and easier to follow, it'll also just make it a little more pleasant to have the interaction. These are obvious. Just do a transition along the sequence, pretty much from the one you're interacting with directly, basically closest to furthest away. Kind of make the toggling pulse out. The cross can be done the same way, essentially, but the square one is a little less clear since all the ones that toggle are equal distance away. Maybe we could do some sort of a radio interaction with that, but that also means that the way we implement it wouldn't be as straightforward. So, because we'd have to have that behave differently from all the rest, which would just be distance based. But I think it's still definitely worth looking into. So I'm going to spend a short bit of time at least investigating what this would be like to implement, And the goal right here is to see if it's straightforward enough for the time that we have. So we're going to take a look at that. We're going to look at the grid cell controller, which currently implements that toggling. And it does so beginning right here. This toggle method is called when you click or tap on one of those buttons. And the normal behavior is to look at the type of that button, whether that's a default cross piece or a row, column, square, or a blocked one, and call the appropriate methods that implement those behaviors. Those are all down here. Each of those simply toggle the ones necessary, and I think this means that we definitely could have that slightly different behavior for the square ones just because they're already being implemented in different methods, so we can have some custom behavior in that one if we need to. And right now they're simply toggling all the appropriate cells relative to the coordinates of the current cell. And what we need to do to implement this is to add some kind of timing behavior to this. We also want to consider, if we're going to do this, over here are sketches and put down some ideas. Trouble with this thing sometimes. I'm just going to use the mouse for these quick rough notes. So what we're looking at here is when we, for example, for the row, we click on one here, it should probably toggle instantly, and each of these would have a delay proportionate to its distance, creating that phase. But that also means we create a bit of a timeline, and that timeline sort of implies a time at which we may not want to allow other interactions because we don't want to deal with overlapping animations. So for example, if we take even a quarter of a second to animate that quick transition, the user could, before that's done, tap somewhere else, and then we would have potentially conflicting animations or toggles happening, and we don't, I think, want to allow that to happen. So this would also be time during which both the animation happens, but also we don't want to allow interaction. So we'll look at implementing that animation first, see if that overlap becomes a problem. And each of these are done through a number of calls to toggle cell on the grid. Which simply finds and flips the state of that particular cell. I think what we're going to do is just delay all the calls to this, which we can do by turning all of these into coroutines. Since they're all called from one place, that'll be pretty easy to do. If we're switching a method from a non-coroutine to a coroutine, then we have to change every place that it's called and the way that it's invoked, which is a little bit difficult simply because they are usually fail silently if they're not called properly as coroutines, by which I mean you call a coroutine without passing it to start coroutine, it won't be an error, it just won't run, which is a little problematic because if you change a method to a coroutine that wasn't before and miss any place that it was called, you may not notice the lack of it being initiated properly. So first thing we're going to do is then just add that start coroutine wrapper to all of these. Then add a simple variable on this, just a little private, to share between all of these the time that we're going to wait in between. We're going to do that. We can do that simply because we can then adjust the time a little easier. Just going to put one of these wait for seconds in between each of the toggles that we want to wait between. We'll add those to the row and column loops that are done, and we'll add them to each of these. We might need to look at the order in these. We don't really care about the order that we implemented these in the square, but now we're going to want to care about the order. So once we get this working, we're going to try that out and then look at making sure that we toggle them all in a consistent radial pattern. So we're going to move over to the gameplay scene where we're going to test out some of these transition timings. Right now we have the timing at a 20th of a second, which doesn't seem like a lot, but each of these, or at least the rows for example, toggle up to 5 things, so a 20th of a second adds up to about a quarter. We want these to be pretty quick transitions, so the timing in between each of them should be relatively small. And we'll see now how those act. We'll create a few of the special pieces on a blank board so that we can look at how they each individually act. We'll try out the cross animation first. It's not quite what we wanted. So it looks like oversight. We don't want to wait for all of these. We just want to toggle for the cross one. I think the center first, then wait, then toggle all the outward ones. So make that adjustment. Go ahead and try these other ones next. Okay, so and now we can kind of look at the one problem I mentioned about the crossover. We do both. Fact is, I think that the end result will still be correct, so we might actually leave it. We'll do a little bit of testing to make sure that they don't interfere, but I think that we might be okay. That's not exactly what we want. So right there we can see that we're toggling basically the same order of them regardless of where we're starting, and that's not what we want. So we also would prefer, for example, that this is in the center, that it would go out in both directions, and that's not going to happen here either. So we fixed the behavior of the cross toggle, and now we need to look at the row and columns. So for example, the row toggle toggles all the cells in its row, walking over column, or walking through each of the column values. So we need to think about how this can walk in both directions. So we want to begin at its own row. Take a look. It kind of looks like this is backwards. Column, row. Getting a little look at what these are doing because I'm a little unsure if the row and column might be swapped within one of these parameters. I think the namings are just off. We're gonna try that out. We're gonna It's gonna take a look when we toggle a row what the code thinks it's doing. Okay, here we go. So watch this in the console. When we trigger this, we'll see all the coordinates that it believes it's changing. That was definitely not the most expected. Did not do this right. Okay, so here we go. We'll try this again. So if we watch this, we'll see that we definitely have the column and row variables swapped in here, which is unfortunate because it's not something I'm comfortable changing too much at this point without breaking other things. But I'm going to give it a try and see what happens. So what we should be doing is if toggle cell takes column and row, we should be passing in same row every time and should be doing the same thing here. Column toggle should always use its own toggle, its own column, and we're going to swap the parameters on these. And now we're going to take a look at how much that broke. It's a little painful of a change, even though it will probably turn out to be overall a minor. Swapping coordinates are a frustrating mistake because changing it means finding all the places that may have assumed one order when it is now another. But I think that it's worth getting over the hump of fixing. Could just swap all of our assumptions and stick with that, but it would make things a lot more difficult forward. So some things are still going to behave exactly the same because some shapes are the same in either direction. Okay. A little bit of mistake here, which we can sort out. see if that improves the behavior of any of these. Our ability to quickly override the type of any piece definitely makes testing these sort of things easier and quicker. Still off. Also did have, so I think we had this swapped in 2 places. Like I said, this is a tedious kind of thing to fix, but worth the effort, worth the frustration. So close. As a matter of fact, that is so close that I would say we can just swap our implementations of the two, possibly. It's not clear why that should be wrong. So if we're toggling the row, we should toggle to share the row parameter and change each of these, and that's not what we're doing, or not the behavior we're seeing anyway. We are going to take a look now at internally what these cells think their coordinates are, and just kind of double check a couple things. We're going to look at the requested column and row, and then the fetched cells expected column and row for itself. Remember, we made no change to behavior here, so we should see these act in the same ways we saw before, but we'll get a little more information about it. Right, and looks like we are recording the right ones, and maybe we're just not expecting the right thing. See, we were logging this column and row. So see all these expecting the same row, but we're getting the same column instead. We're definitely flopping. And I think take a look at that again. Here we toggle, it seems to be correct, but I think it just is a coincidence. The second one is a little more interesting for being off in the way that it is. Oh, so we didn't update our debug to match this, so swap those. Take a second look at that. Okay, let's take a look at these again. Here we can see that the cells think they are at opposite coordinates than we're finding them at. So we may be making some mistakes when recording the locations in the first place, and we're going to take a look at how we're doing that recording. Usually find that these seemingly tiny coding off by one errors are the most frustrating because they're so small that it's very easy to overlook. A larger problem that you can think about as a bigger framework or graph in your head is kind of easier to reason about than these sort of smaller, fine-grained things. Okay. Seems to be correct. We have fixed that bug, and we are going to put a note in there that wasn't a task that we expected because we didn't know that was broken until just now. So let's go ahead and that. And now we'll continue to work on our animations, which are already making progress, but want to get a little more correct. That's how we found this bug, so don't need our logging anymore there, and we can get back to this. So what we want here is to transition them, timing them from by distance, basically. And I'm thinking about this and the best way to do it. We don't necessarily want to, every time we do this, sort all the cells by distance and then try to figure out how to toggle them in order. Instead, we just want to delay them based on the distance. So in thinking about that, we have right now this toggle cell, but instead of simply and think about how to invoke that with an added delay. Which we're going to do pretty simply, actually. We're just going to add a delay parameter that will default to 0. And rather than directly calling cell.toggleSelf, we will call invoke, which also takes that same time parameter. So this will allow us to, through the grid, toggle a particular coordinate with a delay. All of our existing calls will still work as normal immediate, but now we'll begin to determine how long the delay should be. So for example, we'll take a look at the difference, distance essentially, between the original column and the column that we're toggling. And we'll treat that as a factor of the distance. Because we're moving the delay into the toggle cell, however, these that we previously made into coroutines no longer need to be. We've changed how we're handling this, so we're going to change all of those back as well. Also means we change their invocations back to normal methods. So rather than wait within each of those, for example, rather than toggle for the centerpiece, wait a small bit of time and then the rest, we're just going to pass that toggle delay into each of these, and they'll all wait on their own. And that's clearly not what we expected. Well, that was an obvious mistake. Let's find that again. So we may have had it right, and it was just, we may have had the timing right, but the toggling was redundant. So we're gonna look at that. I think that delay is too small for us to notice now. Now it's a delay used for total time, which I think will help the consistency a little bit. As long as there's any delay happening here at all, which is surprising. But would probably be revealed if we take a look at the particular delay that we're calculating for these. Got about 10 minutes left, so I'm expecting at this point that we're going to shift work on the 11 through 15 levels to the next session, as well as some other tasks that we'll leave off. But we'll definitely, I think, have time to finish this up. At least I'm hoping so. Okay. It's just a matter of integer versus float math, so we'll make sure that handling that properly. And I think that is just what we wanted. We might make that delay a little bit larger, but to make sure that you can see it when there's fewer distance to go. A half second shouldn't be a bad delay. And we're going to quickly now take a look at how we want the square toggle animation to go. It's slightly more complicated, so essentially we want to go from, I think, the top here around. So we're going to sort of, the order that we call these in is actually going to matter. We want to start from same column, back a row. And then column over and back a row. Could just rewrite these, but to make sure that I don't duplicate any, I'm going to just move them around as necessary. Now down that column, which essentially means all of the column plus 1. Now back through the row plus 1. And then from this up to the row above and up to the final top left. And now we're going to want to add our delays into here to be a little more complicated to add, but only slightly, because we'll be calculating that within each of these. Just going to add a little helper onto this, as a matter of fact. And the reason we're going to do that is we want to not have to copy this delay calculation like so. There are 8 steps in total, so I'm going to step through the delay time in 8ths. So and then we're just going to add our delay to each of these. Really what we're passing here is to the internal implementation what is the order in which this was called, so that it knows what the delay should be. We're going to try that out now, as well as the change to a half second from quarter second timing on the row and column pieces. We'll give those a shot to see how that timing changed the behavior. I think we might want to change these so that the delay that happens is essentially a little bit longer in the center here and a little shorter from the side. That's not a big change or one that I'm concerned about. Looks like we didn't make that change to the column that we made to the rows, so we'll look at that soon. Right now we also want to check out our square change. Looks like our delays not happening there, though we did not pass our delay call or delay parameter, so we want to do that. And we did not put our delay calculation in the column. Well, I think we meant to copy that out to the square toggle. We cut instead, so just a little mistake. I'm not going to worry with that change the delay at the moment. I think that's something we can leave off for future tweaking, because right now we've got about 2 minutes left on our clock, and one of the important lessons to learn from these hour blocks of development is that a lot of times it's good to set a sort of limit on how long something's going to be worked on, and at some point it's time to cut it off and put a bow on whatever was finished in that time. There is a tendency and an ability for developers to basically use however much time is available to do the same task. Development task is a lot like a goldfish, and the bigger bowl you put it in, the larger it will grow. So sometimes it's really important not to allow it to do that. You notice those column animations aren't working right, but I know exactly why, and that is perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. For the column, we just need to calculate the distance based on the rows that are being walked through. We have just enough time to show that that fix works, and then we will be making a commit for these changes, updating our notes, and doing a really quick shuffle of tasks to session 14. Episode 14 will be coming up next. So if we take a look at this quick fix to the column transition, we'll see that that was a very easy fix. Sometimes the fixes are faster than the time it takes Unity to recompile the code. And there we go. Okay, so I'm going to commit this. We're going to update our notes. And move the next step of level creation. That won't take all of our time, so I think we're also far enough along that we can create these feature graphics and screenshots that are needed to finish the posting on the Google Play Store. That will allow us to create a beta store listing that we can use for internal testing, which internal testing is just myself. But also make sure that that store listing is completely prepared for clicking that final publish button on the end of the project. So that'll be important but pretty simple task to complete. And another part we're going to need for that is a little bit of marketing copy, which is not something I've had a lot of experience with. So that's going to be really important, because something, if you're going to make games, you have to learn all of the things around game making, especially as a one-person or very small studio. There's a lot of hats to wear, and you have to learn to do things that you may not even have been interested in if you're actually trying to sell and market games. So it's something I want to practice doing, something I want to learn more about, and the only way to do that is to practice. So that is the end of session 13. Episode 14 will be coming up next, where we will work a little bit more on level creation and then finish fleshing out our Play Store listing to get ready to publish the game at the end of the month. So hope you enjoyed the show, and I hope you come back for episode 14.